You like to think you're in control of your thoughts, don't you? But what if I told you that your brain is wired with hidden psychological traps? Loopholes so subtle, so deeply rooted in your subconscious, that you're being manipulated by your own mind. Here's a disturbing truth. In 1974, researchers Tversky and Kahneman discovered something terrifying. People don't make decisions based on logic. They rely on mental shortcuts or heuristics that are shockingly easy to exploit. These shortcuts were meant to help us survive. But in the modern world, they've become loopholes for manipulation. Advertisers use them. Politicians exploit them. Even the people closest to you, sometimes without realizing it, trigger these mental traps to control your behavior. But the scariest part? You do it to yourself every single day. This isn't science fiction. It's dark psychology backed by decades of research. And once you see these loopholes, you can't unsee them. They're the reason you say yes when you mean no. The reason you stay in toxic relationships. The reason you feel confident, even when you're wrong. So buckle up. Because by the end of this video, you'll realize just how little of your thinking is actually yours. If this is already making you question reality, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm you're one of the few who dares to think deeper. Subscribe for more psychological deep dives like this, and share it with someone whose mind could use a little rewiring. The confidence trap. There's something eerily deceptive about confidence. We tend to associate it with intelligence, leadership, and success. But psychological research reveals a strange paradox. The more confident someone appears, the more likely we are to believe them, even when they're completely wrong. This isn't just a social quirk. It's a cognitive trap baked deep into the way our brains process certainty. And here's the disturbing part, you fall into it more often than you realize. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a classic example. Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger found that people with low ability in a certain domain often overestimate their competence. In other words, the less you know, the more you think you know. But this isn't just about other people. You've likely experienced it too, those moments when you were absolutely sure you were right, only to be proven embarrassingly wrong later. Your brain craves certainty. It hates ambiguity, so it fills in gaps, creates patterns, and constructs memories to fit the version of reality you feel most secure in. This is why eyewitness testimonies are so unreliable. People don't lie intentionally, they just have false confidence in flawed memories. Consider this. In one study, participants were shown a video of a car crash and asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other. Others were asked the same question but using the word hit instead of smashed. Those who heard smashed estimated much higher speeds, and were even more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass, which wasn't there at all. That's the confidence trap in action. A single word nudged people into constructing a false but confident memory. This trap doesn't just twist your memories, it shapes your decisions. Think about moments where you followed a gut feeling, only to regret it later. That gut feeling felt so right at the time, didn't it? That's the illusion of accuracy our brain sells us. We rarely question the internal voice that says, trust your instincts. But instincts aren't magical, they're just quick pattern recognition systems based on past experiences, biases, and sometimes nothing at all. Yet when those instincts come wrapped in confidence, you follow them like gospel. What's more terrifying is how easily others can manipulate this. All someone has to do is sound confident. Speak with conviction, avoid hesitation, maintain eye contact, and people will defer to them, even when they're spouting nonsense. This is why misinformation spreads so easily online. It's not always the smartest person who gets the most attention. It's the most confident. Social media has amplified this trap, rewarding certainty over nuance. Hot takes over thoughtful reflection. Confidence feels good. It calms the mind, masks doubt, and creates the illusion of control. But that's exactly why it's so dangerous. Because in a world where confidence is mistaken for truth, the people who question themselves become invisible, and those who shouldn't be trusted gain power. So the next time your brain tells you, I'm sure of it, ask yourself, what if I'm just confident? Not correct? The illusion of choice. You walk into a store, pick up a product, compare it to another, and make your decision. Simple, right? You chose it. You decided. But what if that choice wasn't really yours? What if, from the moment you walked in, everything, from the colors on the packaging to the number of options on the shelf, was designed to steer you toward a predetermined outcome? Welcome to one of the creepiest psychological loopholes, the illusion of choice. It's the idea that we believe we're acting freely, while in reality, invisible forces are constantly nudging our decisions. Behavioral economist Dan Ariely demonstrated this with a now-famous experiment. He offered magazine subscriptions with 3 pricing options. One for an online-only version, one for print-only, and one that included both. Strangely, the print-only and the combo were priced the same. Most people chose the combo. Why? Because the existence of the print-only option, despite no one picking it, made the combo look like a better deal. This decoy option created the illusion of value, subtly guiding people toward a decision that felt smart, even though it was crafted to manipulate perception. It's not just in marketing. It's in everyday life, menus in restaurants, political surveys, even Netflix categories. Too many options and your brain becomes overwhelmed. So it looks for shortcuts, preferring what's framed attractively, feels familiar, or appears socially approved. And that's where the trap tightens. Because once you believe you've made a free choice, you become more committed to it, even if it wasn't really yours to begin with. Consider this. In one psychological study, participants were shown a lineup of identical-looking faces and asked to choose the most attractive. After making a selection, researchers secretly swapped their choice for a different face and asked participants to explain why they picked it. Most didn't even notice the switch, and proceeded to confidently justify the new face as if it were their original choice. That's how fragile our sense of agency really is. Our mind doesn't just lie to us, it fabricates reasons to protect the illusion of control. Even your political views, your moral stances, the things you believe are part of who you are, many of those were shaped by framing, repetition, and emotional association, not raw logic. Politicians and media outlets understand this. They don't just inform you, they prime you. They guide you through emotional language, selective facts, and subtle reinforcement, crafting decisions that feel personal but are anything but. So when you say, "I made that choice," pause. Ask yourself, why did I really pick that one? Was it convenience? Pressure? Framing? Familiarity? The truth is, your choices aren't as free as you think. They're often the outcome of psychological forces pulling strings behind the curtain. And the scariest part? The more confident you are in your freedom, the more trapped you probably are. The authority hijack. You might think you're too smart to blindly follow orders, too independent to fall in line just because someone says so. But the truth is, your brain has been wired since childhood to respond to authority in ways that bypass rational thinking, and in some cases, override your moral compass entirely. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most disturbing experiments in modern psychology. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to another person, increasing in intensity with each incorrect answer. The person receiving the shocks wasn't real, just an actor. But the participants didn't know that. And under the instruction of a man in a lab coat, over 65 of them delivered what they believed were fatal shocks, simply because they were told to. No threats, no force, just quiet, calm authority. That's all it took. This is the authority hijack, when the presence, tone, or symbols of power make you surrender your judgment without realizing it. It's not just about scientists in white coats. It happens when a boss gives you an order you disagree with, but you follow it anyway. When a doctor rushes a diagnosis and you don't question it. When someone in uniform says, "It's for your own good," and you silence the voice inside that says, "Something feels off." Your brain has learned to associate authority with safety. As children, we're taught that listening to adults keeps us alive. Questioning them brings punishment or chaos. And that conditioning never truly leaves. It's why people often trust instructions without checking the facts. It's why cult leaders, corrupt officials, and manipulative bosses can get away with so much. Their authority cloaks their actions in legitimacy. But it gets darker. In high-pressure situations, our moral reasoning can be outsourced completely. Psychologists call it agentic shift, a state where you no longer see yourself as acting independently, but rather as an agent for someone else's will. You stop thinking and just do. That's how war crimes happen. Not because every soldier is evil, but because many are operating under intense psychological conditioning to obey, not to think. Even the symbols of authority hijack your perception. A clipboard, a badge, a deep voice, even a firm posture. These tiny cues flip mental switches you don't even know exist. They don't just affect who you trust, they affect how much you question. And sometimes not at all. This isn't about paranoia. It's about awareness. Because in a world saturated with influencers, institutions, and manufactured credibility, learning to pause and ask, is this person right or just powerful? Is a survival skill. Authority isn't evil. But blind obedience? That's where the trap lies. And unless you learn to spot the hijack when it happens, you may never realize how many of your thoughts, actions, and beliefs were never really yours to begin with. The familiarity bias. There's a reason you keep going back to that toxic friend. A reason you find comfort in a song you haven't heard in years. A reason you feel strangely at ease when scrolling through the same type of content, even if it's slowly making you anxious or numb. That reason is one of the mind's most powerful and most quietly dangerous psychological loopholes, the familiarity bias. Your brain is wired to prefer what it already knows. Familiarity feels safe. It lowers your mental defenses, makes your surroundings feel predictable, and gives you a false sense of control. In evolutionary terms, it made sense. If you'd eaten a certain plant before and survived, you'd likely trust it again. If a place hadn't killed you, it probably wouldn't next time either. But in the modern world, this bias doesn't keep you safe, it keeps you stuck. Psychologists Robert Zajonc and others demonstrated this effect in the 1960s with a concept called the mere exposure effect. They showed participants a series of unfamiliar symbols, often meaningless shapes, and repeated some of them multiple times. When asked later which ones they liked best, people consistently chose the ones they'd seen more often, even though they didn't consciously remember them. The message is clear. The more we're exposed to something, the more we grow to like or trust it, whether or not it deserves that trust. Now apply that to relationships, media, habits. That's how people stay in unhealthy cycles, because the dysfunction feels more familiar than the uncertainty of change. That's why propaganda works. When lies are repeated often enough, your brain starts to accept them not because they're logical, but because they've become comfortably familiar. It's not the truth that feels right. It's repetition. Even faces benefit from this bias. In one experiment, participants rated unfamiliar people as more trustworthy simply because their faces had been subtly flashed before them earlier in the session. They weren't conscious of the exposure, but their brains had already started forming preference patterns. This explains why political candidates plaster their faces everywhere, not to inform you, but to become familiar enough that you trust them without realizing why. But perhaps the most dangerous application of the familiarity bias is how it affects your own thoughts. The more you think a certain way, I'm not good enough, people can't be trusted, change never works out, the more familiar those thoughts become. And over time, you start to believe them not because they're true, but because they're emotionally worn in. You've heard them inside your own mind so many times that they start to feel like facts. Familiarity is seductive. It whispers comfort. But left unchecked, it quietly hijacks your preferences, your beliefs, and your reality. You're not loyal to what's good for you. You're loyal to what you recognize. So the next time you feel drawn to something or someone just because it feels right, pause. Ask yourself, does it feel right because it's good, or just because it's familiar? Breaking the loop. By now, you've seen how your brain plays tricks on you. It favors confidence over accuracy, illusion over independence, authority over reason, and familiarity over truth. And the scariest part? These mental loops run silently in the background, influencing your thoughts, emotions, and decisions, all while convincing you that you're the one in control. But what if you could start spotting the trap before you fall into it? Breaking these loops isn't about becoming immune, it's about becoming aware. Self-awareness is the first psychological crowbar that pries open these mental patterns. When you catch yourself nodding in agreement with someone just because they sound confident, pause. Ask, Do I agree with what they said, or how they said it? That single moment of pause is power. It creates space between the automatic reaction and a conscious choice. It helps to understand that your brain isn't broken. These psychological shortcuts evolved for efficiency. They save time, energy, and keep you safe in many situations. But in a world full of persuasion tactics, echo chambers, and emotionally charged narratives, your greatest strength isn't speed, it's reflection. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most researched and effective psychological treatments, is based on a similar idea. If you can identify your distorted thinking, you can challenge it and then change it. Thoughts like, I always fail, or I can't trust anyone, can be broken down and restructured. And that doesn't just apply to therapy, it applies to life. So how do you start breaking the loop? First, question emotional certainty. If something feels too right, too obvious, or too urgent, slow down. Those are often the moments when your mind is leaning hardest on its shortcuts. Second, seek discomfort. Familiarity feels safe, but growth lives outside of it. Talk to people who challenge your views. Read things you disagree with. Step into spaces that make you think differently. Your brain may resist at first, but that resistance is often the gateway to deeper clarity. Third, get curious. When you're about to make a decision, ask yourself, why do I prefer this? Who benefits from me thinking this way? What's influencing me right now that I might not be seeing? These aren't just questions. They're psychological flashlights in a room full of hidden levers. Finally, stay humble. One of the biggest mental traps is thinking you're above mental traps. The moment you believe you can't be fooled is the moment you're most vulnerable. Psychological manipulation isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's a quiet voice in your own mind telling you to stay in place. You can't eliminate every cognitive bias, but you can stop being ruled by them. You can train your mind to notice, to reflect, to challenge. And when you do, something strange happens. You don't just think more clearly, you start reclaiming your reality.